The air in the Grand Central Bus Terminal was a stagnant soup of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and the quiet desperation of 1,000 different journeys. For Arthur Vance, this was the smell of anonymity. It was the scent of his self-imposed exile, a gray shroud he pulled over himself each morning when he put on the drab gray uniform of a station attendant. He swept floors that would never be clean, wiped down benches that would never be comfortable, and watched faces that blurred into a single, unending stream of humanity. Each face was a story he had no interest in reading. Stories, in his experience, always had tragic endings. His own story had ended a decade ago, not with a whimper, but with the catastrophic bang of betrayal. He had been the architect of a financial empire, a man who could see the future in spreadsheets and market trends. His name, Arthur Vance, had once been synonymous with vision and audacious success. His partner, Richard Thorne, had been the face of their firm, charming, silver-tongued, and utterly ruthless. Arthur was the engine, Richard was the polished chrome, and one day, the chrome had decided it no longer needed the engine. A leveraged buyout, a smear campaign, and a series of fabricated documents later, Arthur was left with nothing but the rubble of his life and the bitter taste of his own naivete. He had trusted a snake, and it had bitten him. So he disappeared. He let the world believe the lies Richard had spun, that he was unstable, a reckless gambler who had nearly destroyed the company. He cashed out the one small, hidden account Richard had missed, a pittance compared to his former wealth, but enough to vanish. He became a ghost, a janitor, a bus station attendant. He built a fortress of solitude around his wounded heart, its walls cemented with cynicism. He observed the world from behind a veneer of indifference, convinced that every act of kindness was a transaction, every dream a prelude to a nightmare. His small, barren apartment was a monastery of misery. One chair, one table, one bed. No photographs, no mementos. Nothing to remind him of a life that was no longer his. He was polishing the glass of a scheduled display case when a voice cut through the monotonous hum of the station. It was sharp with frustration, yet threaded with a resilience that was so foreign to him it was almost jarring. "No, I understand," the voice said. "I get it. Another no. Thank you for your time." Arthur glanced over. A young woman stood near a pillar, her phone pressed to her ear. She was probably in her late 20s, with hair the color of dark honey pulled back in a messy bun, and a fire in her eyes that even a string of rejections couldn't seem to extinguish. She wore a simple blazer that was neat, but had clearly seen better days. She was clutching a thick portfolio to her chest like a shield. She hung up the phone and took a deep, shuddering breath. He expected tears. He expected her to slump onto a bench, defeated. That's what the world did to people with fire in their eyes. It drowned them in disappointment. But she didn't cry. Instead, she immediately redialed. "Hey, Lily," she said, her voice instantly softening, the brittle frustration replaced by a warmth that felt like sunlight in the cavernous, dim station. "No, it's okay. It was just another bank. They didn't get it. Because they're looking for numbers, sweetie, not vision. But we have vision, don't we? Lumiere will happen. I promise. I will not let you down." Arthur stopped wiping the glass. He listened, an unwilling eavesdropper. The name Lumiere snagged his attention. Light. Of course. She was selling light in a world of shadows. "I know," she continued, her voice quiet but firm. "I know it's hard. Just a little longer. I'll pick you up from practice. I love you too." She ended the call and finally allowed her shoulders to slump. She sank onto a nearby bench, the one he had just wiped down, and rested her forehead in her free hand. The thick portfolio slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor, spilling a few papers. She didn't seem to notice. She was lost in that bleak space between a failed attempt and the energy required for the next one. Arthur watched her for a long moment. His programming screamed at him to walk away. Not your problem, not your world. She'll be crushed eventually. They all are. But something held him there. The promise she'd made to Lily. The unwavering belief in her voice, even when she was talking to a child. It was a language he had forgotten how to speak. He walked over, his worn-out shoes making no sound on the grimy linoleum. "You dropped this," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were hazel, flecked with green, and they were tired. "Oh, thank you." She began to gather the scattered pages. One page lay near his foot. It was a schematic, a design for a low-energy, sustainable LED bulb that used a new kind of recycled filament. His mind, the part of him he thought was long dead, sparked to life. The design was elegant. It was efficient. It was brilliant. It wasn't just a product. It was an idea. It was a tiny piece of a better future. He bent down, picked it up, and handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers, and he felt an unexpected jolt, a flicker of human connection he hadn't experienced in a decade. "Lumiere," he said, reading the name on the header. "Light." "It's a sustainable lighting company," she said, a hint of pride cutting through her exhaustion. "Or it will be, if I can ever get anyone to believe in it." She offered him a small, weary smile. "My name is Clara." "Arthur," he replied, the name feeling strange on his tongue. He was just the attendant. He wasn't Arthur, not anymore. "Well, thank you, Arthur," she said, stuffing the papers back into her portfolio. She stood up, squared her shoulders, and managed another smile. Time to go fight the next dragon. She walked away, disappearing into the river of travelers, leaving Arthur standing there, with the ghost of her determination hanging in the air. He returned to his duties, but the grayness of the station felt different. It felt more pronounced, more suffocating. Clara's fire had illuminated the bars of his own cage. He finished his shift, the image of her schematic burned into his mind. He walked home through the cold city streets, the cynical walls of his fortress beginning to feel thin. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his single chair, in his silent apartment, and thought about the world he had left behind. A world of sharks and predators, a world that would devour someone like Clara and spit out the bones. Richard Thorne had taught him that. But he had also taught him something else. He had taught him the importance of hiding, of having secrets. Tucked away in an encrypted corner of the digital world was his last remaining weapon, the Phoenix account. It was the seed money he had escaped with, which he had since, out of pure, obsessive habit, grown into a small fortune through careful, anonymous investments. He never touched the money. It was a monument to his past life, a score he kept against the world. He was a ghost, and this was his ghostly treasure. He opened his laptop, an old, unmarked device. He hadn't accessed the Phoenix account in years. He typed in the layers of passwords and security keys. The screen flickered to life, a portal to a world he had sworn off. He found Clara's company, Lumiere, with a simple search. It had a basic, hopeful-looking website with a contact email. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Walk away. This is not your fight. You will only get hurt." The voice of his past was loud, insistent. But then he heard another voice, Clara's voice, on the phone. "I promise, I will not let you down." He made a choice. It was small, impulsive, and utterly illogical. It was a rebellion against the last 10 years of his life. He composed a short, anonymous email from his encrypted address. To Clara, founder of Lumiere, "I have reviewed your business plan. It is not without its flaws, but the core concept is revolutionary. Conventional banks are blind to vision. I am not." Attached is a contract for seed funding in the amount of $500,000. The terms are simple. I require a 10% stake in the company and quarterly progress reports. My identity will remain anonymous. I am a silent partner. You will know me only as the Phoenix. The choice is yours. He attached the funding transfer authorization and a standard investment contract. He read the email one last time. It was insane. He was breaking every rule he had built for himself. He was reaching out from his tomb. He hit send. And for the first time in 10 years, Arthur Vance felt a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. The reply came less than an hour later. It was short, breathless, and vibrating with disbelief. Is this real? Arthur allowed himself a small, grim smile. He typed back, "The funds will be in your account by morning. Get to work." And so began the strangest chapter of his life. By day, he was Arthur, the invisible attendant at the bus station, a man of routine and silence. By night, he was benefactor, a mentor communicating through sterile, encrypted emails. He guided Clara from the shadows, his decade of market-honed instincts reawakening with a startling clarity. He pointed out weaknesses in her supply chain, suggested improvements to her marketing strategy, and challenged her projections with ruthless precision. Clara, in turn, was a force of nature. Fueled by the sudden infusion of capital and belief, she worked with a ferocious energy. She rented a small workshop, hired a skeleton crew, and poured every ounce of her being into Lumiere. Her quarterly reports were not the dry corporate documents Arthur was used to. They were passionate narratives of progress, filled with triumphs and setbacks, all detailed with brutal honesty. She wrote to the Phoenix, not as an investor, but as a confidant, the only one who had believed in her when no one else would. Arthur, meanwhile, found himself drawn into her orbit in the physical world. He started taking his coffee breaks at a small cafe near her workshop. He'd sit in a corner with a newspaper, a silent observer, watching her dream take shape. He saw her directing deliveries, her face smudged with grease. He saw her laughing with her small team, sharing pizza on the hood of a car. He saw life, vibrant and messy and real, and it was like a starving man watching a banquet through a window. One afternoon, she walked into the cafe, looking exhausted but happy. She ordered a coffee, and then her eyes landed on him, a flicker of recognition. "Arthur? From the bus station?" He nodded, his heart giving an unsteady thump. "Hello, Clara. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" she asked, a friendly smile on her face. "Just on a break," he mumbled, a half-truth. "Well, it's good to see you," she said. "You were there on one of my worst days. It's nice to see a familiar face on one of my best. We just perfected the prototype." "Congratulations," he said, and the word felt surprisingly genuine. Just then, a little girl of about 8, with Clara's hazel eyes and a mischievous gap-toothed grin, bounded into the cafe. "Clara, can we get a brownie? Mrs. Henderson said I was the best listener in class today." "Lily, what did I say about running in here?" Clara said, but her voice was full of affection as she ruffled the girl's hair. She turned to Arthur. "This is my sister, Lily. Lily, this is Arthur. He was kind to me once when I needed it." Lily looked at Arthur with an unnerving directness that only children possess. "You have sad eyes," she declared. Arthur was taken aback. Clara looked mortified. "Lily, that's not a nice thing to say." "It's not mean," Lily insisted, her brow furrowed with serious thought. "It's just true. They look like the stray cat behind our building. He's sad too, but he's nice if you give him food." Arthur found himself smiling. A real, unforced smile that felt like stretching a muscle he hadn't used in years. "She's very observant," he said to Clara, "and she can have a brownie. On me." That was the beginning. It became a small ritual. Arthur would see them at the cafe. He and Clara would exchange pleasantries. He learned that she was raising her younger sister after their parents had passed away years ago. Lily, in turn, seemed to adopt him. She would save him a seat, tell him about her day, and ask him probing questions that no adult would dare. "Why do you work at the bus station? Don't you get lonely? Do you have any friends?" He answered with edited truths. He told her he liked the quiet. He told her he liked watching people. He never mentioned his profound, soul-crushing loneliness. Through his quiet friendship with Clara and Lily, the walls around him began to crumble. brick by painful brick. He was starting to feel again, and it was both wonderful and terrifying. One evening, as they shared a simple dinner of takeout on a park bench near the workshop, Clara confessed her anxieties about the phoenix. "He's a genius," she said, staring at the half-eaten container of noodles in her lap. "Every piece of advice he gives is gold. He's saved me from a dozen mistakes. But it's strange. I feel like I know him, but I have no idea who he is. Sometimes, I wonder if he's even real." Arthur's stomach tightened. "He invested in you," he said carefully. "That's real enough." "I know, and I'm so grateful, but I wish I could thank him. I wish I could tell him what this means, not just for me, but for Lily." She looked at him, her gaze open and searching. "You're a good listener, Arthur. You remind me of him, in a way. You're quiet, you observe things other people miss, and you give really good advice." He almost choked on his water. "I just sweep floors, Clara." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You do more than that. You see things. Like that time you pointed out the flaw in our workshop's wiring, just by looking at the fuse box. Our electrician was amazed. He had forgotten about that. A simple observation based on his long dormant knowledge of industrial infrastructure. He had played it off as a lucky guess. He was getting careless. He was letting the real Arthur leak through the cracks of his disguise. "I'm getting married," she said suddenly, changing the subject. The words hit him like a physical blow. He felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in his chest. It took him a moment to identify it. Jealousy. "Oh," he managed to say, "congratulations. Who is he?" "His name is Marcus Thorne," she said, a faint blush on her cheeks. "He's very different from me. He's from a wealthy family. They're in finance. But he's supportive of Lumiere. He thinks it's a charming little venture." Thorne. The name was a bucket of ice water down his back. It couldn't be. It was a common enough name. "Marcus Thorne?" he repeated, his voice strained. "Son of Richard Thorne?" Clara looked surprised. "Yes. Do you know them?" The world tilted on its axis. The past wasn't just resurfacing. It was a tidal wave about to crash down on the small, fragile island of happiness he had found. Richard Thorne, the man who had destroyed him, was about to become the father-in-law of the woman he had secretly saved. The irony was so cruel, so perfectly vicious, it could only have been authored by fate itself. "I've heard the name," he said, his voice a dead monotone. He had to get out of there. He had to think. "Arthur? Are you okay? You look pale," Clara said, concern in her voice. "I'm fine," he lied, standing up abruptly. "I have to go. Early shift tomorrow." He walked away without looking back, the casual warmth of the evening suddenly feeling frigid. He was caught in a trap of his own making. He had reached out to help one person, and in doing so, had led her straight into the lair of the monster who had ruined his life. And she had no idea. That night, the email from Clara to the Phoenix was full of excitement. She told him about her engagement to Marcus Thorne, about how this union would provide her company with stability and connections. She was marrying into the family of Richard Thorne, a titan of industry. Wasn't it wonderful? Arthur stared at the screen, his hands shaking. He typed a one-sentence reply. "Be careful who you trust." He knew it wasn't enough. He knew he was walking a razor's edge. The secret of his identity, once a shield, was now a ticking bomb, and it was sitting right in the middle of Clara's bright, promising future. The wedding invitation arrived via a courier to Clara's workshop. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, with embossed gold lettering. It smelled of money and legacy. Clara showed it to Arthur one afternoon at the cafe, her eyes shining. "It's becoming so real," she whispered, tracing the names Clara and Marcus's with her finger. Arthur looked at the invitation, and all he could see was a summons to his own execution. The wedding was to be held at the Thorne family estate, a place he knew only from glossy magazine spreads, a symbol of everything Richard had stolen from him. "You have to come, Arthur," Clara said, her expression earnest. "You and Lily are my real family, my only family. It wouldn't be the same without you there." Lily, who was busy drawing a picture of a winged cat on a napkin, looked up and nodded emphatically. "You have to come. I'm the flower girl, and you can watch me and make sure I don't trip." How could he say no? Saying no would require an explanation, and he had none to give that wasn't a lie or a devastating truth. "I'll be there," he heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, the pressure mounted. Richard Thorne, a man Arthur had not laid eyes on in 10 years, began to take an active interest in Lumiere. He saw it not as his future daughter-in-law's passion project, but as a potential asset to be absorbed into the Thorne financial empire. He started showing up at the workshop, a sleek, silver-haired shark gliding through waters that were not his own. Arthur made sure he was never there when Richard visited, but he heard about it from Clara. "He's so brilliant," she'd say, a little starstruck. "He's offered to help us scale up, to introduce us to his network. He wants to bring Lumiere into the Thorne Industries portfolio after Marcus and I are married." Every word was a nail in Arthur's coffin. Richard wasn't helping. He was circling. He was preparing to consume her dream, just as he had consumed Arthur's. As the Phoenix, Arthur sent Clara increasingly urgent warnings. Maintain controlling interest. Do not sign any partnership agreements without independent counsel. Your intellectual property is your greatest asset. Protect it at all costs. His warnings created a friction between them for the first time. "The Phoenix is being paranoid," she wrote back one night, a hint of frustration in her tone. "Richard is family now. He's on our side." The day of the wedding rehearsal dinner, the bomb finally went off. Arthur was at the bus station, trying to lose himself in the familiar, mind-numbing routine, when Clara appeared. She looked frantic, her face pale, and her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." He led her to a small, empty staff break room that smelled of burnt coffee. "I was at the Thorne estate," she began, wringing her hands. "Richard and I were talking about you. I told him about my friend Arthur, the kind man from the bus station who's been so good to me and Lily." She paused, taking a shaky breath, and he got this strange look on his face. "He asked for your last name. I told him it was Vance." Arthur felt the floor drop out from under him. It was over. "He took me into his study," Clara continued, her voice barely a whisper. "He showed me a file, an old employee file from his first company, Vance Thorne Equity. He told me about his first partner, Arthur Vance, a man he said he mentored, treated like a brother, a man who betrayed him, a brilliant but unstable man who made a series of reckless, catastrophic trades and nearly bankrupted the firm. He showed me documents, letters. He said he had to fire you to save the company and that you had a complete breakdown and disappeared." She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading for an answer that would make sense of the chaos. "He said you were a disgraced genius, a cautionary tale. And then he told me about the Phoenix." Arthur closed his eyes. Richard had played his hand perfectly. He hadn't just exposed Arthur, he had poisoned the well, twisting the narrative until Arthur was the villain of his own story. "He figured it out," Clara said, tears now streaming down her face. "The timing, the anonymity, the sophisticated advice. He said it had to be you. A pathetic attempt to latch onto my success, to relive your glory days by manipulating me from the shadows. Is it true, Arthur? Are you the Phoenix?" He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a single, miserable gesture. The look on her face was one of profound betrayal. It was 1,000 times worse than anger. "So all of it, our friendship, was it all a lie? A game? Were you just sitting in that cafe, watching me, feeling powerful? Was I just some project to you?" "No," he managed, his voice cracking. "No, Clara, it was never like that." Then what was it like? She cried, her voice rising. Why would you lie to me? Why would you let me believe you were just a janitor? Why didn't you just tell me who you were? Because that man is dead, he finally burst out, the words tearing from his throat, raw with a decade of pain. Richard Thorne killed him. The documents he showed you, the story he told you, it's all a lie. He's the one who betrayed me, who stole everything from me. I disappeared because he left me with nothing else. She stared at him, her chest heaving. She was caught between two impossible stories, two realities. One came from her charming, powerful fiancé's family. The other came from a man she thought she knew, a man who had been lying to her since the day they met. I don't know what to believe, she whispered, her face crumpling. I trusted you. I let you into my life, into Lily's life. The mention of Lily was a knife in his gut. All I see is that the man I'm about to marry, his family, they're offering me a future. And you're a ghost with secrets and lies. She took a step back, shaking her head as if to clear it. I need you to leave, Arthur. I need you to stay away from me, and stay away from my sister. I can't have you in my life. I have a wedding tomorrow. She turned and fled, leaving him alone in the sterile, soulless break room. The rejection was absolute. The walls he had so carefully let down came crashing back in, entombing him once more. He had lost. Richard Thorne, after 10 long years, had won again. He had not only taken Arthur's past, he had now stolen his future. Arthur walked out of the bus station, not bothering to clock out. He walked through the city for hours, a ghost once more, invisible to the crowds around him. He ended up at his apartment, the monastic cell that suddenly felt like the only place he belonged. The old cynicism washed over him, cold and familiar. He had been a fool to think he could be part of the world again. Connection only ever led to pain. Kindness was just a weapon that others used against you. He made a decision. He would pack his single bag, drain the Phoenix account, and disappear again. This time, for good. There would be no more Arthurs, no more Phoenixes. There would only be dust. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, he looked at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Mr. Vance, this is Clara's lawyer. I have a message from her. She said to tell you that Richard Thorne presented her with a new partnership agreement this evening. It would effectively sign over controlling interest of Lumiere to Thorne Industries. She said to tell you that you were right. Arthur stared at the phone. Richard hadn't waited. He was already moving in for the kill, trying to legally hijack the company before the wedding even took place. He sank into his chair, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Clara knew Richard was a liar, but she was still trapped. She was alone, about to marry into a family of predators, her life's work on the verge of being stolen, and he was the only one who knew the whole truth. His despair was a vast, dark ocean. He felt himself sinking, the pressure crushing him. He had failed. He had tried to help, and had only made things catastrophically worse. His instinct was to run, to save himself from any more pain. But then his phone rang. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call. He saw the caller ID. It was Lily. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the decline button. His promise to Clara echoed in his ears. Stay away from my sister. But his finger, moving with a will of its own, swiped to answer. Arthur? Lily's voice was a small, frightened whisper. Clara's crying. She's been crying all night. She locked herself in her room. Lily, he started, his own voice thick with emotion. That man, Marcus's dad, he was here, Lily sniffled. He was yelling, he said Clara was being ungrateful. He said she owed them. Clara's scared, Arthur. She won't talk to me. There was a pause, and then the words that would change everything. She needs you, Arthur. I know she does. She told you to go away, but her eyes were sad when she said it. Like yours. The child's simple, profound truth cut through a decade of his carefully constructed cynicism. It sliced through his fear and his self-pity. This wasn't about his pain anymore. It wasn't about his past. It was about Clara, trapped and terrified. It was about the promise he had watched her make to her sister in a bus station a lifetime ago. "I will not let you down." A fire he thought long extinguished roared to life in his chest. A cold, clear rage. Richard Thorne would not win. He would not destroy another good thing in this world. Not while Arthur Vance was still breathing. "It's okay, Lily," he said, his voice now steady, calm, and full of a purpose he hadn't felt in 10 years. "Everything is going to be okay. I promise." He hung up the phone. He stood up and walked to his closet. He pushed past the gray attendant uniforms and reached into the very back. His fingers found the cool, smooth fabric of a garment bag he hadn't touched in a decade. He pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside was a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the armor of his former life. He made 2 calls. The first was to his old lawyer, a man of unimpeachable integrity, who had been one of the few to believe in his innocence all those years ago. "David," he said, "it's Arthur Vance. I need your help, and I need it tonight." The second call was to a contact from his old life, a forensic accountant of near-mythical skill. "I have a job for you," he said. "I'm sending you the financials for Vance Thorne Equity from 11 years ago. I want you to find what Richard Thorne buried." He did not sleep. He worked through the night with his team, the old instincts sharp and lethal. The ghost was done hiding. It was time for Arthur Vance to come back from the dead. The Thorne estate was a monument to obscene wealth. Manicured lawns rolled out like green carpets, and a sprawling mansion of pale stone gleamed in the afternoon sun. Guests in designer clothes and expensive jewelry drifted across the terrace, their laughter tinkling like ice in crystal glasses. It was a world of surfaces, of polished exteriors hiding rot and decay. Arthur arrived not in a limousine, but in a simple black town car. He stepped out wearing the charcoal suit, which fit him as if it were a second skin. He was no longer the stooped, invisible bus station attendant. He stood tall, his eyes clear and focused. The years of hiding had vanished, replaced by an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He looked like a man who owned places like this, not a man who cleaned them. He walked past the security guards, who straightened up instinctively at his presence. He held a single, modest envelope in his hand. He saw the wedding planner, a flustered woman with a clipboard, look at him with confusion. He wasn't on the list. "I'm a friend of the bride," he said, his voice calm and even. She hesitated, but something in his gaze made her nod and wave him through. He entered the grand ballroom, where the reception was being held. It was a cathedral of wealth, with towering flower arrangements and chandeliers that dripped diamonds of light. He saw the Thornes holding court near the head table. Richard, sleek and smiling, the picture of magnanimity, his wife, Eleanor, dripping with jewels and disdain, and Marcus, the groom, looking smug and triumphant, a pale imitation of his father's predatory grace. Then he saw Clara. She was standing alone by a window, looking out at the gardens. She was breathtakingly beautiful in her wedding gown, but she looked like a porcelain doll, fragile and trapped. Her eyes were hollow. When she saw him, her breath hitched. A storm of emotions crossed her face: shock, fear, and a tiny, undeniable flicker of relief. Marcus noticed her distraction and followed her gaze. His eyes landed on Arthur, and he sneered. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Look what the bus dragged in. Clara, darling, is this your little charity case? The janitor?" A ripple of cruel laughter went through the assembled guests. Richard Thorne turned, and his smile froze on his face. He saw not the broken man he had exiled, but the brilliant, dangerous partner he had betrayed. For the first time that day, a flicker of unease crossed Richard's features. Arthur ignored them. His eyes were only on Clara. He walked toward her, moving through the sea of hostile faces as if they weren't there. He stopped a few feet from her and simply looked at her, his expression conveying everything he couldn't say. "I am here. You are not alone. I will not let you down." She took a small, involuntary step toward him before Marcus stepped between them, physically blocking her. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Security will show you out." "He's my guest," Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. It was the first spark of the fire he had seen in the bus station. Marcus laughed. "Darling, he's an embarrassment. Now be a good wife and smile for the pictures." Arthur simply placed his modest, plain white envelope on the gift table, a stark contrast to the lavishly wrapped boxes and designer bags. He saw Eleanor Thorne glance at it and curl her lip in disgust, whispering something to the woman next to her. The mockery was palpable. He found a seat at an empty table in the far back of the room, a silent sentinel. He watched. He waited. The reception proceeded, a hollow pantomime of joy. Speeches were made, toasts were offered. Finally, Marcus stood up, champagne glass in hand, for the groom's toast. "I want to thank you all for being here," he began, his voice slick with false sincerity, "and for your incredible generosity." He gestured toward the gift table. "To our family and friends who have helped us build our new life together. And," he paused, his eyes finding Arthur in the back of the room, "we must also thank the smaller contributors. Every little bit helps, I suppose." He raised his glass in Arthur's direction, a malicious smirk on his face. "Even the janitors have to do their part." The room erupted in sycophantic laughter. It was a public, brutal humiliation. Arthur didn't flinch. He just watched Clara, and he saw her break. But she didn't break into pieces. She broke open. The porcelain doll shattered, and the woman of fire emerged from the wreckage. She stood up. The laughter died down as all eyes turned to her. She looked at Marcus, at his sneering face, and all the love she might have felt for him turned to ash. Then she looked at Richard, the architect of her entrapment. Finally, she looked at Arthur, and her eyes filled with a deep, wrenching understanding. "You're right, Marcus," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that silenced the entire room. "We should thank our contributors." She walked to the gift table and picked up Arthur's plain white envelope. She held it up for everyone to see. "You all see this envelope," she said. "You see it as small, as worthless. You've been mocking the man who brought it. You call him a janitor, a charity case." Her voice trembled with a rising tide of fury and conviction. "This man, Arthur Vance, is the reason every single one of you knows my name. This man is the reason Lumiere exists." A shocked murmur spread through the ballroom. "When every bank in this city laughed at me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "When I was alone and defeated and had nothing but a dream, this man found me. He invested in me, not just with money, but with his wisdom, his guidance, and his unwavering belief. He did it all anonymously, asking for nothing in return. He is the silent partner, the benefactor, the man you all know as the Phoenix." The gasp in the room was audible. Richard Thorne's face went white as a sheet. "He funded the business that made my career," Clara declared, her eyes locking on Richard. "The same business that you, Richard, tried to steal from me last night with a predatory contract designed to strip me of my own company." She wasn't finished. She pulled a folded document from a small purse on the head table. "And speaking of theft, Arthur didn't just bring me a wedding gift. He brought me proof." She unfolded the paper. "This is a forensic accounting report detailing the illegal fund transfers and fraudulent stock dilution that Richard Thorne executed 11 years ago to illegally force his partner, Arthur Vance, out of the company they built together." She looked directly at the stunned guests, at the reporters who were now scribbling furiously. "The man you've been mocking isn't a failure. He's a victim of the man you've been celebrating. The entire Thorne empire is built on a foundation of lies and theft." She turned back to Marcus, whose face was a mask of horror and disbelief. She slowly, deliberately, pulled the engagement ring from her finger. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice like steel. She let the diamond ring drop onto the pristine white tablecloth, where it lay like a shard of broken glass. Then she walked through the silent, parted crowd, straight to the back of the room. She walked to Arthur. She took his hand, her grip firm and sure. "Let's get out of here," she whispered. Together, they walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of the Thorne dynasty behind them. They stepped out into the clean, fresh air, the sounds of chaos erupting behind them. For the first time that day, Clara smiled, a real, brilliant smile. And Arthur Vance, the man who had returned from the dead, smiled back. The fortress was gone. The wounds were healing. He was finally, truly, free. 1 year later, the world was a different color. The persistent gray that had defined Arthur's existence had been replaced by a vibrant, ever-changing palette. The headquarters of Phoenix Partners, his new venture capital firm, was not a sterile tower of glass and steel, but a repurposed warehouse loft, all warm brick, reclaimed wood, and vast windows that flooded the space with natural light. It was a place for builders and dreamers, not predators. The air didn't smell of diesel fumes, but of fresh coffee, whiteboard markers, and the electric hum of innovation. Arthur stood before a large window, looking down at the bustling street below. He no longer wore a uniform of anonymity, but he hadn't returned to the armor of expensive suits either. He wore a simple, well-made shirt and slacks. He was comfortable in his own skin for the first time in his adult life. His firm was a runaway success. But its mission statement wasn't about maximizing profit. It was about empowering visionaries. He backed the outsiders, the idealists, the ones with brilliant ideas who, like Clara, had been dismissed by the conventional world. He was the phoenix, but now he operated in the light. The Thorne empire, on the other hand, had crumbled. The revelations at the wedding had triggered shareholder revolts and federal investigations. Richard Thorne was mired in lawsuits and public disgrace, his reputation shattered beyond repair. Marcus had faded into obscurity, a footnote in a scandal that had rocked the financial world. They were the ghosts now, a pair of small arms wrapped around his legs. "What you looking at?" Lily asked, peering up at him. She was 9 now, and her gap-toothed grin was as bright as ever. "Just the world," Arthur said, smiling as he ruffled her hair, thinking about how much can change. "Clara said you're a professional thinker," Lily said, matter-of-factly. "She said that's your superpower." "She gives me too much credit," he said softly. "No, she doesn't," a voice said, from behind him. Clara walked over, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to him, her fingers brushing against his. The simple touch still sent a pleasant spark through him. Her company, Lumiere, occupied the other half of the loft. It had become a leader in sustainable technology, its innovative products changing the industry. She was no longer just a founder. She was a celebrated CEO, a testament to what integrity and passion could achieve. Their partnership had evolved from a silent, anonymous arrangement into a deep and seamless collaboration, both in business and in life. They were a team, in the truest sense of the word. "Lily's right," Clara said, leaning against the windowsill beside him. "Your superpower is seeing the best in people, even when they can't see it themselves, even when you were trying your hardest not to." He looked at her, at the love and trust in her eyes, and felt a profound sense of peace. The wounds of his past were no longer gaping fissures, but faint scars, reminders of a battle he had survived and won. Later that day, they left the office and walked toward the park. Their route took them past the Grand Central bus terminal. Arthur paused for a moment, looking at the grand, dirty building where his second life had begun. He saw a young man in a cheap suit sitting on a bench, his head in his hands, a portfolio splayed open beside him, the very picture of defeat. The old Arthur would have walked past without a second glance, seeing only another victim of a cruel world. But he wasn't the old Arthur. He walked over to the young man. Clara and Lily waited for him, understanding. "Tough day?" Arthur asked gently. The young man looked up, his eyes weary. You have no idea. I just got laughed out of the biggest pitch of my life. I might, Arthur said with a small smile. He pointed to a design in the portfolio. That's an interesting approach to data compression. Have you considered applying it to nonlinear systems? The young man's eyes widened in surprise, a spark of hope igniting in his tired expression. How did you? My name is Arthur Vance, he said, extending a hand. My office is a few blocks from here. Why don't you come by tomorrow morning, and we can talk about it? They walked away, leaving the stunned young man staring after them. As they entered the park, the late afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows on the grass. Lily ran ahead to the swings, her laughter echoing in the air. Clara slipped her hand into his. You couldn't help yourself, could you? She teased. Old habits, he admitted, or new ones. They sat on a bench, watching Lily soar back and forth, her feet kicking toward the sky. It was a simple, perfect moment. This was what he had fought for, what he had almost given up on. Not an empire, not revenge, but this. A family, a purpose, a life built not on transactions, but on trust. Thank you, Arthur, Clara said quietly, her head resting on his shoulder. For what? For everything, she whispered. For seeing the light when all I could see was the dark. He looked at her, then at Lily, a beacon of pure joy against the setting sun. He had spent a decade hiding in the shadows, believing the world was a place of darkness. But Clara and her sister had shown him that even in the dimmest of places, light was not only possible, it was waiting. You just had to be brave enough to help it shine.